we are talking about some very sensitive issues today. They may come up in the conversation. So we just wanted to first start off and say, hey, if this is something that is going to be hard for you, then maybe this isn't the conversation you want to hear this morning. Or if you've got little ears around, just to let you know that we are going to be talking about some difficult things. So just wanted to put that out there first. But firstly, David, let's talk about where the church in New Zealand is at, particularly in terms of the Royal Commission of Inquiry. What was concluded and what did the apology a year ago involve?
So the Royal Commission offered a fairly devastating account of abuse in care, both by the state and in church institutions. And that shouldn't have come as a huge surprise because similar reports have come from many other countries, the US, the UK, Ireland, Australia. But there is something very confronting in realizing that really is a universal problem. It happened here as well. The churches, in making their apology over a year ago, I think that was appropriate and generally positive. The event in Parliament, when the government offered its apology, was also well done. I thought all the political parties spoke well. Since then, it's been something more of a mix as to whether those apologies have been matched in practice and in action. And we've just had the day of reflection on the 12th of November. And it was interesting how survivors gave something of a mixed response to progress in the year since the reporting of the Royal Commission.
You said a mixed response. Can I inquire what kind of responses you had?
So some are positive. They point to the fact we're in a much better place now than we were before the Royal Commission and its report. And certainly going back longer, 10 years ago, it's huge steps forward.
Right.
So you might see that as something of the glass half full view. Looking at the glass half empty, the government has not implemented or said it won't implement one of the main recommendations, which was around a new redress scheme, and reports of the amount of financial redress or funding for redress. They're reports that a very significant part of that won't be going to survivors. It will be going elsewhere. So on both of those, I think they're strong reservations and criticism. And actually, even the apology, when it was given by the government, it came at a time when the government was also promoting its boot camp policy, which one of the very clear conclusions from the inquiry was that was likely to be a factor in creating an abusive culture. So those would be some of the mixed messages, I think, from the last year.
Now, the inquiry covered sexual and physical abuse, but I think for the church there's another dimension, spiritual abuse. So I wondered if we could talk about what this is. I mean, people listening today may go, well, what is spiritual abuse? I don't know what this looks like in a church context.
So this is a much less familiar area, and it's come into focus in the last 10, 15 years or so. International research has been done, particularly by Lisa Oakley and colleagues in the UK, but not exclusively so. And this is focusing on how spiritual authority and spiritual influence can be a really important factor in abuse, particularly in faith-based settings. Now, in terms particularly of the relationship between spiritual abuse and sexual abuse, it's important to be aware that just because there's spiritual abuse doesn't necessarily mean there'll be sexual abuse, but spiritual abuse is a huge enabler of sexual abuse in faith-based contexts, so much so that going back the other way, it's almost always the case that whenever there's sexual abuse in a faith-based context, there's some level of spiritual abuse which is involved in that, either directly enabling it or enabling the cover-up around it. So for churches, there should be greater awareness of spiritual abuse and its relationship to the other forms of abuse in a faith-based context.
I mean, how do you know spiritual abuse is happening? What does it look like? Because I think, it might just seem a little bit confusing to know what that could even be.
So Lisa Oakley's work is very helpful here. She sets up a traffic light, a sort of red, yellow, green, because she is aware of the criticism that what somebody might think of as abuse is poor practice, it's mistakes, it's something other than abuse. So she is helpful in keeping a focus on systems and cultures. It's not just individual incidents. It's not just one-offs. It's a systematic pattern which is important, which reflects an imbalance of power in a faith setting around spiritual authority. So it's not just one bad experience, it's a whole pattern. And that allows this sort of traffic light system allows one to think, well, is this just a one-off? Or are we getting into yellow territory here? Or actually, are we seeing a really systematic pattern and we've got to call this red rather than green or yellow?
Right. You talked about reconciliation and healing. What's a good guideline for the journey of reconciliation and healing, thinking particularly within a church context?
So one of the most important things which is recognized is the importance of truth alongside reconciliation. Don't rush to reconciliation as a goal in itself that leaves the truth behind. That reconciliation has to be in the light of truth rather than to the exclusion of truth. So we've been gifted by the Royal Commission with a really valuable report. There should be no discussion of reconciliation until that report has been read and reflected on and prayed on and considered. And any church leader or church member who is thinking we can just get past that and on to reconciliation without taking on board the message, and it is a painful and difficult message, a painful and difficult truth, which is being offered in that report, but it is a gift. And if churches want to go to reconciliation without fully taking on board the truth of the report, that's a mistake.
Okay, well, that is good to know. In terms of listening to people who have been in the situation where perhaps there has been spiritual or sexual abuse, how do we listen to them in terms of what is good for their healing?
That's a really good question because there's limits for what most churches, church leaders, or church members can do, but there are positive things that they can do. So I've been involved with a small group developing an open access, that's to say a free, freely available document accompanying survivors of sexual harm, a toolkit for churches. And one of the points that makes is that all churches should be able to make positive first responses. And by that, I mean that the three R's, that the recognize, respond, and refer. And part of the refer is an acknowledgement that churches might not be able to give the best specialist help and counselling. That needs to be referred on to somebody else. But all churches should be able, as a first step, to recognise, to make a positive response, and then to have available a referral service to those who are better placed to help.